This will be a weekend of light and love and wonder.
2024 has been an extremely weird year, and what I mean is we've had some really awful films, but on top of that, we did have some pretty decent ones as well. Although I will say, when compiling this list, the terrible films heavily outweighed the number of good films, but I digress. We're gonna separate out the negativity from the positivity today, so you have clicked on the positive video, and that is my top 10 best films of 2024. Now listen, I'm a liar first of all, and I'm bad at making lists second of all, and third of all, I'm bad at making choices. So what I actually did is I had ties all down the board, and really you're getting a top 20, okay? Some of them are a little more thought through than others. Nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and get into those, and I'll give a little bit about why each of them I enjoyed and why I would suggest you see them. Today, we're going to be doing no spoilers, so that way they are fresh for you guys to go watch yourselves if you want to. So hopefully you guys can glean a couple of extra movies that you haven't seen that maybe you'll enjoy. Now, before I actually get into the list, let me also say, if you guys like this type of content, please like and subscribe. It always helps out a small channel like this. We're getting so close to 10,000 subscribers, so if you can help us get there and hit that subscribe button, we really appreciate it, and thank you guys so much for all the support on the channel recently. Alright, fine, I've stalled enough. Let's go ahead and get into the top 10 films of 2024. CrazyRocky edition. Now let's go ahead and start with number 10, and again these are all ties down the board. So here we have Hanky, Panky, and Destroy All Neighbors. Now Hanky Panky you might be a little confused about. It's not like a Tom Hanks film from the 90s or 80s, or no wait, was that like there's that a dude, I'm thinking about the Gene Wilder movie. Oh my god, it's from 1982. Anyway, it's not that film. Basically, this film is a horror comedy, which I love horror comedy. I think a lot of the times it's done kind of poorly, but it's also not done that often, and when it is done, and it's done decently at least, it's really enjoyable. This is very much that schlocky, over-the-top, very cheap B-movie horror that really is just very much held together by the jokes. I can see how some people might not like the jokes as much, or they may think it's a bit overdone or over the top, but overall I think that the base plot of this basically hat that is evil and wants to take over this guy's brain essentially then turns into this overall mega plot when this guy who is antisocial goes out for the first time and actually hangs out with a group of people, and the hat and him get into some scuffles. It's called Hanky Panky because he actually has a talking handkerchief, and so yeah, there's I'm not gonna say anything else about it, but it's definitely a very funny film, and it's something that I would definitely suggest. Then when it gets to Destroy All Neighbors, I will say that this is also one of those like very specific types of films that are for very specific people. It's definitely more of like a splatter film, and it is again like comedy horror, but it's extremely grotesque in many ways. But I think it was so much fun in various different parts of it, and I think it does the horror that it wants to do in a pretty fun way, with the surrealist elements kind of working pretty decently all together. So I think that it deserves that 10 spot next to Hanky Panky. Coming in at number 9, we have Drive Away Dolls and My Old Ass. Now, Drive Away Dolls is more of like a 90s crime thriller comedy type thing. Less thriller, more like crime and comedy. The film stars Geraldine Viswanathan. I have no idea how to say her name, I apologize, but she was in Miracle Workers with Daniel Radcliffe, and I really do enjoy some of her stuff, although Miracle Workers went in a weird direction at that last season. And of course it also has Margaret Qualley of Sanctuary fame, and obviously she has more well-known stuff beyond that, but that's all I'm gonna say here. Oh yeah, there's also Substance, which is on this list. Nonetheless, in the film, the two are friends that want to kind of get away and kind of try something new in life, and they end up taking a wrong car that has a ton of drugs in the wheel, and this causes everything to go awry, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's a bunch of comedy, and it's just a really fun movie that I really enjoyed. My Old Ass is definitely a little bit more of a complex one. The title in of itself is definitely obviously very weird and brash, but I think that the film is one that tugs on the heartstrings at times, but ultimately also it does have a lot of fun moments. That it's very much a coming of of age film, and basically it deals with a girl who has a mushroom trip, and all of a sudden she meets her older self, which is, for this girl, Aubrey Plaza, and the younger version of this lady is Maisie Stella. But essentially when she meets her, she is given one order, and that is to not fuck a guy named Chad. Now, I feel like for most women that's a rule, but this was also like, don't date a guy named Chad, etc. And the guy named Chad just happens to show up immediately afterwards. From there, she manages to keep in contact with her older self through some weird telephone futuristic technology that is quite stupid if you think about it, but just don't. And yeah, I think it's a very good coming of age romance that really, it does have a lot of those like traditional Tumblr type feels, I suppose, in some ways. All right, next we have 8, Salem's Lot and Killer Body Count. Salem's Lot, I think people hated on for some reason. I understand that to a lot of people it's nowhere near as good as the miniseries from when it originally aired. I've never seen the miniseries. I imagine it's quite good, and I will have to watch it at some point. But for this film, I really enjoyed it for what it is, and I think maybe for some people, it just being that remake did ruin it for, their own personal reasons. But I think the film does do vampires in a very creepy way, and I've seen some shots from the original that it definitely does take and modernize in a way that makes it look really cool. And by modernize, I don't mean necessarily the time period. The time period remains around the same, but on the newer cameras, it gives this like icy feel when the vampires are on the outside looking on in. There's like these very creepy sound effects that are used and everything for the vampires. And honestly, it's one of the first times that I've been like, oh, okay, that's actually like a really creepy vampire. Killer Body Count is a whole other story, okay? Now, I will say this movie is technically trash. Don't go in looking for an amazing film. However, it is like an absurdly funny, over-the-top film where a girl basically gets caught like fucking a guy in a church, and then, or she's just given a handy, I think, and then she gets sent to like some sex camp, and at the sex camp she gets abused, and then there's like a serial killer. It's like a whole thing. It's very weird, but it is so much fun. I highly recommend you watch this one of all of these, actually, especially if you're just somebody who likes funny bad movies. If you don't like funny bad movies, don't watch it, but if you do, watch this. Number 7, we have The Wild Robot and Transformers 1. Transformers 1, I will say that I was surprised by, in the sense that, like, I just think it took the traditional Transformers, brought it back to life in a certain way that really felt authentic to both nostalgic pieces of certain things, as well as to the modern take that one might have on Transformers. And then when it came to The Wild Robot, I really enjoyed, a lot of the themes that were dealt with family there. The Wild Robot essentially sees this robot falling into this planet, and she's meant to kind of take over it, but instead she ends up kind of meeting this wildlife and meeting these various things, and she ends up kind of becoming a piece of this natural place and really finding her own place here. And also she kind of learns what family is, and she learns more about it, and then things kind of go crazy from there. There's like elements of things like metaphors for when a kid goes off to college. There's metaphors for death. There's a lot of really interesting things going on with this film that I think they handle it really well. I would put it not quite as high, but I would definitely say it's in the same realm as something like Soul, which is one of my top animated films of all time. At number 6, we have Inside Out 2 and If. Inside Out 2, I think, just was a good film. I think it took the original characters and moved it into an interesting place where I think it made sense to add in depression and these various things that kids start to deal with, especially as their hormones start to roll. And Inside Out 2 definitely killed it in the box office. It kind of reignited Disney in many ways. But essentially with this one, I believe it saw, the main character from the first one, Riley, kind of just grow up, mature, start to deal with things such as depression, and, start to contemplate certain things such as death and various other elements like that, which I think, is a very good way to go with it. It would be really funny if we get like a late college movie where she's like smoking weed and getting railed, and that's like, she's got like an addiction one in there or something like that. That would be fucking hilarious. if is Imaginary Friends. I would say it very much reminds me of Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. There's this young girl who all of a sudden, after some traumatic events in her life, particularly her mother passing, she starts to be able to see other people's imaginary friends. However, imaginary friends can apparently be lost, or the connection can be severed. So the young girl kind of just sets out to try to reconnect imaginary friends with, their people. And I think it's such a really cute and heartwarming movie. And it definitely did move me to tears at the end. I'm not gonna lie. It's such like a beautiful film with a lot of really, really good messages and a lot of fun along the way. Number 5, we have Snack Shack and Monkey Man. Snack Shack is another coming-of-age story. This one is, I think, more geared towards the guys, where My Old Ass is more geared towards the girls. It deals with two guy friends that basically pull together some money and they try to rent out the Snack Shack for the summer, where they can utilize that to make some money. They reinvigorate it and turn it into a nice little business for themselves. But along the way during this summer, they have certain falling outs. They have certain crushes and interactions with girls that kind of push them apart, but at the same time in the end pull them together. And it's definitely just a really fun and also I think really like real coming of age story that I think a lot of people, especially younger people, will really enjoy. Plus, there's some like genuinely funny parts. Then we have Monkey Man, which basically deals with a guy who is trying to get revenge for, I believe it was the death of his master, something like that, Sifu style. It is a fantastic action movie. Basically, like throughout this entire thing, there is such intense, visceral, like fighting, fisticuffs, shooting, every type of violence that I can imagine, and it's done so very, very well to the point where it almost becomes like body horror. At number 4, we have Woman of the Hour and Heretic. Woman of the Hour, I think, is a film that initially I really underestimated, or I just thought differently of, because it, to me, through the trailer, looked like it was going to be another like Jeffrey Dahmer monster type thing. And on top of that, I typically think it is very self-indulgent for a actor to like direct and act at the same time. Like, it can be done, but I think oftentimes it really like spreads somebody too thin, and it's not the best idea. However, Anna Kendrick here did an amazing job at both acting and directing in this film, and I think that this film did a very good job of not like kind of taking the original story and glamorizing it or just using it as like torture porn. The film basically discusses the dating game killer, which is a person who went on the dating game show where they basically won a date with the girl who was on at that time, and it turns out that that guy was a serial killer, hence the name, the dating game killer. And yeah, I think just the movie did very good with it. Then when it comes to Heretic, this one I actually have debated about moving even like a little bit higher. I really enjoy Heretic. I think it did a fantastic job of pulling together like traditional horror with psychological horror and adding these really interesting and usually boring but more deep philosophical elements regarding religion and other things, and it took it and it made it into very much a debate or informational thing, while also putting out like a very entertaining thing to watch, which was very cool to see in a horror movie. Basically, two girls come to Hugh Grant's house. Basically, it is Sophie Thatcher, and I think it was something East, Chloe East or something like that. Hold on. Oh my god, I guessed exactly correctly. Anyway, both of them did fantastic, and Sophie Thatcher I already know is amazing from various other things, especially Yellow Jackets. However, Chloe East I'm not as familiar with, and so she really did stand out here for me. I think especially towards the end, she really held the film together and like really was pulling it pretty much on her own. Hugh Grant's always amazing, but so, you know, we don't even have to go deep into that part. Third, we have Alien Romulus and Late Night with the Devil. Alien Romulus, I think, really took the Aliens formula and reinvigorated it by pulling it into the modern era and actually just making like a decent alien film once again. For me, I think the ending did get a bit contrived and a bit unnecessary when we get to like the thing birthing out of the girl and killing her. I think it's like, again, something that ties it to previous films in a way that's just unnecessary, and I think it's where the previous films kind of went wrong in many ways. But overall, the tension in this film, the utilization of like the droid and her attachment to it and all this other stuff was amazing. Basically it's this brother and sister, and one of them is actually just a droid. They want to get off this planet, and in the process of doing so, they end up joining a group that's kind of robbing something. However, everything goes wrong when the ship that they are robbing actually has like a predator on it, basically. Well, not a predator, an alien. Yeah, you know what I'm getting at. And yeah, I think again it did it quite well. Late Night with the Devil was a very interesting, like, surrealist timepiece thing. It takes the kind of weird and interesting aesthetic of old talk shows, looking into another dimension, essentially, like one of an era that is gone, an era that we can no longer attain, and something that is just nothing from these days obviously looks like it, because everything we used is so different from what we use now. And it took those kind of uncanny elements and it weaved it into a supernatural horror that I think worked insanely well. Basically, it deals with a talk show host who gets kind of trapped in his own show after his wife, who has cancer, ends up passing away. There's a lot of like underlying elements that you have to read into. A lot of stuff is not told to you, and it is very much not holding your hand, but it is definitely worth kind of thinking over it. And I think it is accessible still, as some might call it, but I do think it is one that is best served with like sitting there watching it and then afterwards contemplating it for a bit and coming back to it later. All right, now we're at the top two. So for number 2, we have Thelma and Your Monster. Now, I'll start with Your Monster because Thelma I much prefer, but I will say Your Monster is a really good Melissa Barrera comedy horror, I suppose. A lot of the horror feels a little bit forced in the film, particularly at the end. It doesn't make a whole ton of sense. However, the film basically deals with a girl who finds out she has cancer, gets broken up with, and just her entire life goes extremely horrible because particularly some things that her like ex-boyfriend does to her. Through this experience, she ends up finding a monster living in her house, and he's like, oh yeah, no, I was like the monster under your bed, like I'm that monster. And she ends up kind of just having this interesting relationship with this monster. It's definitely like a mixture of like romance, drama, comedy, horror. It's an interesting mix, and I really, really enjoy it. And even though I think that some of it feels a little forced and it's not perfect, I really, really like the movie, and it's one of my favorite comedies, I think, of the year, which is why it's so high and it's up here next to Thelma. For Thelma, what we see is the film is a kind of like, I want to call it surrealist. It's really not, but the way it's shot and everything else, it very much feels that way. But it is a comedy, drama, action film about a older woman who basically gets her money scammed from her, and so she then decides to track back who it was and go find them and get her money back. In this process, she has a grandson who really cares for her and loves for her, that's trying to deal with his own issues as well as grappling with his potential loss of his grandmother at some point in the near future. And also we have some ditzy parent characters that kind of play into it as well. I think the film is amazing, and it really deals with familial relationships in such a beautiful way, and in a way that I really, really took to heart, and it really did pull on my heartstrings, particularly at the end. And on top of that, it's just very, very funny. And also Richard Roundtree is I don't remember the main woman who plays Thelma, but Richard Roundtree is a secondary character who like helps her throughout the way. This was one of his final posthumous films, and I think that he did amazing in this role, and the chemistry that they had was fantastic. And there was a primarily underlying idea of, hey, at some point you do need help. You can't just do everything by yourself, and that's fine. You can have some independence and still get help, and I think the overall messages were fantastic. So finally, to my number 1 slot, what have we tied here? We have I Saw the TV Glow and The Substance. Now, I will say that if I am forced to put one of these above the other, I will put I Saw the TV Glow above The Substance personally. However, it is very hard for me to differentiate them, so I will say, to me, they are equal, and this is definitely more of a genuine tie, where, for example, too, I would say Thelma I much prefer. I still think Your Monster is amazing and would put it as, probably the closest to my second, but ultimately this one is very, very close, if not completely tied. So, I Saw the TV Glow deals with a young man who finds a TV show that he really enjoys, and he connects with this other young girl on the show, and basically they start this friendship that ultimately leads to some really interesting places. There's a lot of metaphors that can be taken from it. Body dysphoria, there's definitely an underlying trans element that they have going on. I think that like this one is hard to talk about a lot without ruining stuff, so I'm going to say definitely go watch it. It is another one that I would say you need to think about afterwards, but I think it's accessible enough, and generally it's such a great film. It looks so beautiful. I love the color palettes, the aesthetics. Everything about it is so fantastic, and again, like the acting, the messaging, everything. Then we have The Substance, which is another one that is stylized like a Cronenberg film in many ways. It's very much a body horror film. It has this like very clean futuristic sets where, like, for example, their apartment is like this really interesting and very like minimalist apartment that I really kind of like this idea of this woman who's basically killing herself in many ways just to be able to attain the perfect ideal of society for as long as possible, not only because it's what society wants from her, but because she wants to maintain her status on top of society. She doesn't want to be forgotten, and she wants to continue living high on the horse like she has been. I'm getting ahead of myself. Basically, the movie is about Demi Moore, who basically is fired from her TV show where she did like Pilates stuff, like workout stuff essentially. Margaret Quigley, however, is a person that she apparently has inside of her, and as somebody tells her, it is the best version of her. The reason the movie is called The Substance is because Demi Moore takes this drug or substance that basically allows her to live in another body, in a more pretty body, over the course of, like I believe a week or 2 weeks. However, there is the possibility to like drain the other body, aka Demi Moore's main body, of her blood and her life force in order to continue just mere days, if not weeks, of living in this beautiful body, and she of course abuses all of this. The film goes to such insane places, but I think it's very clear oftentimes what it's trying to say. I think it gets its points across very well, and I do think while the body horror is intense, I actually think it's not quite as gratuitous as many other body horror films do, and I think it's used in a way that is very intentional and really does add to the plot. Alright, so there you have it. There is my top 10 best movies of 2024. If you guys have any that you think should have been on this list or anything like that, definitely let me know down below. I have a couple of movies to shout out here that are just anywhere from like pretty solid to just meh. I'm not going to really explain on these, so I'm just going to roll them out. The Beekeeper, Lisa Frankenstein, Ricky Stenicki, Kung Fu Panda 4, Godzilla X Kong the New Empire, Hitman, Deadpool and Wolverine, The Instigators, Wolves, and Nosferatu are all films that I would definitely like to say, hey, they were definitely good, if not like really good, and some of them might have made it on the list, but hey, just didn't work it out this year. And then there were some films that I like didn't get to see that I either would have saw or I just didn't want to see that maybe were popular that you guys might bring up. So I haven't seen Bob Marley One Love, Love Lies Bleeding, Challengers, Wildcat, Kinds of Kindness, Oddity, Joker 2, Terrifier 3, Piece by Piece, or Juror 2, or Wicked, which we're going to hopefully change Wicked here very shortly. But so ultimately, let me know what you guys have seen, what your favorite films are, what your least favorite films are, and yeah, but look out for more content like this on the channel. We're going to be getting out a top 10 worst movies. I will also be having my co-host Jason come on and get some, and yeah, it'll be a great time. And Happy New Year, everybody. I'm recording this literally as New Year bestows upon us, so Happy New Year, and I hope everybody stays safe this year. So all right, guys, again, like and subscribe if you like this type of content, and I will see you all in the next one.
Abducted by my brain and it drains all